Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to all of you on our Thought Leadership series by Interweave Consulting. Interweave is a professional diversity consulting organization that introduced corporate India to the opportunities of diversity and created a space and a value for D&I discussions. From a base of couple of offerings as Interweave began, it is today a one-stop shop with a suite of offerings including audits, interactive workshops, posh at workplace, innovative e-learning modules, programs with art and theater, and customized consulting solutions. Today's thought leadership series, the conversation is on impact of gender fluidity on posh policy. But before we get into this, just wanted to tell all of our viewers today that we have two upcoming programs in the month of April. The first one is happening on 19th of April in Mumbai. This is on inclusive competencies and applications. This is a physical event happening in Mumbai. And the next one that we have is on allyship as an enabler to inclusion. This is a virtual session, which is on 20th of April. All the details are available on the screen. Simultaneously, you could reach out to us at meera@interweave.in or log on to our website, which is www.interweave.in for more details and registrations. Impact of gender fluidity on posh policy. Today, if you look at it, gender fluidity and inclusivity is becoming the norm in the current work environment. A sexual harassment policy that looks at protecting only women at the workplace is not enough. Organizations are increasingly reviewing their internal posh policy to make it gender fluid. This is a conversation between Nirmala Menon, as we all know her as Nimi, founder and CEO, Interweave Consulting. She's an HR professional with about almost 4 decades of experience. Over the last 2 decades, she has become one of the most recognized specialists in the DEI space in India. Her passion for this reality unexplored space in India led her to set up Interweave Consulting in 2007. Welcome, Nimi.
Thank you, Mitch.
And with that, we have another speaker, Veena Gopalakrishnan. She is an employment law partner at Trilegal. She has over 14 years of experience in employment law advisory, specializing in complex issues relating to workforce structuring, employee mobility, employee benefits, etc. She has extensive experience in advising on laws pertaining to workplace sexual harassment and discrimination, and regularly advises and guides clients on reacting and responding to discrimination and workplace harassment issues. Welcome, Veena.
Hi, Veena.
Hi, Nami. Hi, Mitch. Hi, everyone.
Hello. So before we get started on that, 2 more important announcements. There is a CC caption available on all the platforms, so please feel free to use this as per your need. Second, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box and we will take it on from there. Over to you, Nimi.
Thank you, Mitch. And thanks, Veena, for being present with us. This is a topic I remember that we've talked about quite a bit, but we were both a little skeptical, saying, hey, this is such a sensitive topic. Do we have enough information yet? What if we say something wrong? Is the time right yet? Should we wait for more cases and examples to come up, etc., etc.? But thank you for accepting to be part of this conversation. Simply because I think as a thought leadership series, it's important for us to not shy away from subjects that are out there where customers and clients are asking us questions. Now, we may not necessarily have answers or the right answers at this point, but I think the intent is for us to become aware and acknowledge that these issues exist. And is there a conversation that we can have around it to ensure that we do the right things? So it is in that spirit that, Veena and I have come together for this conversation. Thank you very much, Veena.
Thank you so much. Always happy to be part of an Interweave event. To me, it is my safe space where I can have all of these conversations with you all on what do you see in terms of how the D&I space is evolving, growing, It's a subject that is very close to my heart and also has an implication in terms of both my own workplace as well as workplaces of our clients. And I think it's very valuable that we've always had this relationship and the ability to have these conversations. It is, however, taking it to the next step to have these conversations with an audience and put ourselves out there and say, it's a conversation we're willing to have. We don't have answers. There may be answers, there may not be answers, and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Veena. And considering that we have only an hour and we are going to be exploring a subject that we really haven't done as much in the past with, and not a lot of cases or issues that have come up either, I'm going to get straight into the subject. Now,
Yeah.
as a society, I mean, any society around the world has always had some kind of norms around gender, right? Either in terms of dress, behavior, roles, responsibilities, etc. And these have tended to remain kind of rigid. Even today, they tend to kind of play a very strong role in how we tend to see how men and women should be in society. Right, over the last several years, we have seen that things have started to change. We have seen more women, for example, in the workplace, women leading organizations. We have seen women's cricket team, football teams, women in military, men as stay-at-home dads. These are some changes that have happened. But along with it, something very, very important has also been happening, which is the higher sensitivity to people that don't necessarily fall into the male or the female bucket, so to say, the gender piece, right? And we are, for a long time, we thought only men and women. We looked at it as in such a binary fashion that anyone who felt they didn't belong in either of them was seen as not following the norm, right? And today we've given that a name and said gender fluidity is a term that probably captures this best at this point. Because here are a group of people that may not necessarily be consistent in their self-determination of their gender. I mean, they could present themselves as, in their gender identity and expression as one gender or the other. And tomorrow they could feel completely different and present themselves in a very different fashion, right? So for this reason, we call this gender fluidity. Now, of course, this is a hard term. It's very hard to define and pin it down because there's a whole variety of people and experiences that would fall under this. But for our understanding today, let us use this as a simple term where it is up to the individual who determines what their gender expression and identity for that day is. So they can take it on a day-to-day basis, right? Now, having said that, this has an implication for organizations, right? HR policies and HR leaders and managers need to deal with some of these issues that can come up from a specific group of people that others may not fully understand. And this has been a cause of concern. It has come up. And while the sexual harassment law exists, it came in 2013, by the very title of it, it covers only women. So, which means that only women can complain. So, what happens to men in the organization? We also know that men can get harassed. So, where do they go with their complaints? Or where does anyone, for that matter, who belongs to a different gender identity go? So, while this act was brought in as a way of building better equality and better diversity into organizations, it's ironic that it also narrowly defines it as available for, in a sense, only women and cisgender women, so to say, right? So, Veena, what do you think? How do we deal with this legal vacuum, and how do we kind of hold space for people that are different?
Thanks, Nimi. There is a lot to say in this space. So, first, starting with fluidity as a concept and how we are really catching up with it, it is very difficult, and I think we all need to start from a place of acceptance that gender is actually a spectrum. And if you're going to, like, create rigid boxes saying it was previously binary, that's women and men, then it became male, female, transgender, then it's becoming switch. What we're really doing is creating smaller buckets of different identities and providing certain benefits, entitlements to one identity, and not providing a benefit or the ability or a protection to another identity. And I think it's time now to understand the gender itself. Is when we say gender fluidity, it's time to catch up and get comfortable with the fact that we're all on a spectrum, and we don't really need to identify with one side or the other, and that's perfectly all right. Now, in terms of the law, we go back to the constitution. The constitution allows the state to make legislations, set out provisions that protect certain categories of people. So it could be minorities, it could be people from either minority religions, caste, women, and this is also taking into account the social construct. And there is no denying the fact that in terms of exposure to harassment and the statistic around who gets harassed more, that I think we are all on the same page that as on date it is the women who are getting harassed more, and the law does not really say cis women or non-cis women. So it's, I think the makers of the law probably don't know the difference either. It's just male and female, and or didn't know at that point in time. So the posh act really is in one way a platform that the law is giving for women to go and make their complaints of workplace sexual harassment. And and what it does is it mandates employers to provide a time bound redressal mechanism. It's as simple as that. The law is nowhere saying just because you're protecting women, you don't need to look at the other people. There is no stopping an organization from going beyond the tenets of law. What the law really does, and what any law really does, it sets out the basic requirements for a society to run smoothly. And that changes over time. We evolve. It's not the gender fluidity was not there. Today, we are at a time and place where we are more comfortable acknowledging it, we're more comfortable talking about it, we're comfortable having these conversations, and it's perfectly fine for organizations, and it's encouraged, and it's something that uh, is very, very fairly routine, at least with a lot of our clients, that policies are gender neutral. Harassment is harassment. If it happens in the context of a woman, if the woman is aggrieved, then you follow the process prescribed under the POSH Act. If the aggrieved is a person who does not identify as a woman, then you have your own grievance redressal policy. It's not, I don't believe that any organization, and I'm taking some liberty to say that now, would be comfortable knowing that a male employee is getting harassed sexually or otherwise and doesn't do anything about it simply because the law does not need them to do anything about it.
And very fair, I mean, that you bring in that issue. But I was just, as you were speaking, Veena, thinking that pretty much world over, I think, there is that at the root of almost all abuse, discrimination, violence, etc., is this thing of following social norms. And anyone who is defying social norms in any manner, it almost seems like the rest of society has a right to kind of punish them, right? And which is possibly what has happened with this community, where if you're not conforming to one or the other, you were subject to greater ridicule, abuse, comments, etc. And while the law does not specifically say this, and as organizations we claim that we will protect all our employees, very rarely does it really happen in the nuanced way it should, right? So in terms of the gender, the posh policy, for example, can an organization, by saying we are a zero tolerance, we have zero tolerance for any kind of abuse or harassment in the workplace, or by saying we protect all employees irrespective of their gender identity, expression, etc., cover for this. So would a
All right.
general neutral policy take care of it?
So yes and no, and I'll tell you why. I think the proof of any pudding, like it's always said, is in its eating. It's very nice and very comfortable for me to sit on top of a corporate hierarchy or pyramid and say, okay, from where I sit, it is an equal opportunity policy. We have zero tolerance to any kind of harassment, discrimination, etc., and be completely oblivious to what is actually happening in, say, the shop floor or on the ground or at the workplace. And there are so many things. There are microaggressions, there are inequities, there are, I mean, a lot of times the people who are drawing up the policies or signing off the policies are probably completely oblivious to things that just happen on a day-to-day basis and never translate to a complaint. And that's where education and conversation, while you don't may not necessarily have to have a policy protecting every gender identity, like specifically calling it out and have something more general and say any kind of sexual harassment is something that we don't tolerate. But as part of your training, as part of your conversations at the workplace, if you highlight that it's not really a male female thing, it can go beyond that, I think that will be very valuable. And it also somewhere empowers individuals who do not identify with the binaries of male and female to get comfortable with the fact that the policy has actually thought about them, that the makers of the policy and the organization, even if it's not set on paper, they're thinking of them. And that's where employee resource groups, all of these people also play a huge role in bringing that conversation and letting people know that, hey, traditionally it's only been male and female, we've removed male and female from our policy, but that does not mean that you're not included, that we're going to continue sticking to the binaries of gender. So which is why I think having a broad policy is often convenient and a good thing, because some of these concepts are also evolving rapidly. And when you talk about social norms, I'm sure we've all seen a day when we were all made guilty because we went to work. We were all made guilty because we wore pants. We were all made to like our feminism has evolved one day after the other. So I think social norms are evolving. Policies and organizations may not have the time to like revamp their policies every day and revamp their handbooks every day. So keep it broad, but keep the conversation specific. When you're talking about examples, give specific examples.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Veena. So sometimes our clients ask us, now there is a law which is, to be complied with. And, if we were to, add things to it, for example, if we were going to cover men and, other gender identities, and possibly invest or vest the IC member committee with the authority to investigate cases of gender non-conforming complaints, for example, or complainants rather. Would we be doing the right thing? I mean, is it okay for us to go over the law on this, or can we do this through our service rules? Does the company have the right to do something like that? Because there are companies that say we have to submit a report and it talks only about women complainants. So can we add them? Can these cases come under the radar of IC, etc., etc.? So there are quite a few questions that come up in this area.
Good. So, couple of things. One, who is the best person in an organization to inquire into and investigate a case of sexual harassment? As on date, the only people who are trained to do it within the organization, you should have done it by now, is your internal committee. We should have been working on having them set up, having them trained, having frequent conversations from 2013 onwards. So currently, they're the only people who are properly equipped to receive and redress a complaint of sexual harassment. Under law, their scope is limited to receiving and redressing complaints of sexual harassment made by women. But there is really nothing stopping them from being requested to, required to, enable to, empowered to review and redress complaints of anyone who, whether or not they identify as male or female. Now, coming to the second point, there are obligations under the law. There is a time bound redressal mechanism which the POSH Act prescribes for complaints of sexual harassment of women. Am I required to adhere to that? Make your own policy. If you want to, I would say, if you're having a policy of 90 days for women, there's no harm in keeping a similar timeline for people who don't identify as women as well. It's just that you may not. There is no consequence to breaching it. If it's a woman, then you're violating the law. There's no consequence, so you might as well put it in your service rules. The second thing is the annual report itself. Again, we get asked that a lot, saying, "Oh my God, we'll have to disclose the number of cases." Oh my God, you don't need to. You only need to disclose the number of complaints that have been made in the context of the POSH Act, which is with respect to women complainants. Second is there is no need to panic because the number of complaints, very often we look at it as a bad thing, that when your annual report has a large number of complaints, we see a perception that the company is plagued with workplace sexual harassment, and that may not be true, and it's often not true. It's indicative of a robust grievance redressal machinery that is in place. When will I get complaints? When people have faith in my system, when they know that the grievance redressal mechanism is running well and there is actual justice that one person can get, then it does encourage people to make those complaints. If complaints get unnoticed, if they're not handled well, then nobody is going to come and make that complaint. And if organizations are going to believe and live in that myth that no complaints means my organization is paradise, then that is a point of concern.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, Veena, when the POSH Act first came in, there was a lot of work that was done around training committee members and helping them view things from a woman's point of view, for example,
Yeah.
right? How women, around the world, you have things like a reasonable person, and then it was changed to a reasonable woman, right? Perspective kind of a thing. Now, when it comes to gender fluidity, an area that most people are not very experienced with or aware of, and all of that, would it help to mandate? When I say mandate, obviously the law is still to catch up on some of this, but as a good practice within organizations, for them to have a queer member as part of the committee, would that help, or should this person be brought in only when a complaint of the complainant is a gender fluid person? What are your thoughts on this? Because we
So
kind of
one,
today made a committee which has more women, for example, right?
yeah.
It's 50% plus women in the committee. So when we are talking about other gender identities, what should the composition of the IC be?
So, if we have the representation, we should, because your committee should be as diverse as it should be representative of the organization.
Yeah.
So, if your company is all men, then you are going to be that client who comes and says, "We have no women. What do we do? Can we get from this other sister company, client company?" So, your IC is at some level representative of the organization that you have. It's aspirational if you can actually have a person who identifies as queer or is outside the gender binaries of male and female, who can come and be part, who's qualified and capable and has the maturity and skills to be part of the committee. That's great, but most organizations may probably not even have reached that point in their company's life where people are outing themselves and comfortable enough to take significant leadership positions to be part of a committee. If it's there, then great. If it's not there, then ensure that you have allies. Because again, allyship is something that companies have started working on, and companies, I think that there's a long way to go there. You don't need to be a woman to be able to understand the realities of a woman's life. Similarly, you do not need to be a person from the LGBTIQ space to be able to understand their realities. That being said, the one big job of an ally is to be able to pass the mic and give an opportunity to somebody else. So unlike all the men who talk about feminism all their on all of these panels and platforms without really giving the exposure to the women, I think it's also important for if a company has the space for a queer person to be on an ICC. That being said, there are other attributes that are valuable as well, such as maturity, perspective. We're seeing this backfire in the context of posh. It's not always the case, but it's happening a lot. When they say the senior most woman in the organization should be the presiding officer, it's not always that the senior most woman in the organization comes with an open mind. She's probably carrying very, very deeply ingrained patriarchal opinions and thoughts and ideas. And when you're really senior, sometimes you have that influence over the other people as well. So, which sometimes translates to the whole ICC being a bunch of very judgmental, very uh, uh, very conservative in not a nice way kind of a system. So it's so many parameters. Just having a check in the box again makes your ICC inadequate, because you need to look at more than gender in terms of what the ICC brings to the table.
Yeah. And one of the things that we also hear about the posh policy, and even with just women complainants, is that it's misused, right? And yeah, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of those kinds of questions. My question is also from the angle of, it's, people are crying foul, saying it's being misused, women are playing their gender card to their advantage, etc. Now, when it comes to somebody with a gender fluid identity, it gets even more complex, right? I mean, I show up as a male today, and I feel like a man. I am doing things and expressing myself in the male identity, and tomorrow I'm fluid, and therefore I'm showing up as a woman, and therefore offended by, say, something that has happened. Okay, now this could complicate things for a committee, and it can show up in multiple ways in the use of restrooms, and would you throw some light on how some of these situations can be handled?
Yeah, this is in fact, this is the scariest part of the conversation for me, because uh, the I want to be able to understand fluidity in its truest sense, and appreciate the idea of self identification. But we what I do also understand is the concerns that people have in terms of safety. So just to give context, there's a lot of conversations happening around gender neutral bathrooms in public spaces, and JK Rowling got into a lot of trouble for, and she did make some statements where she did overstep. But simply put, it meant that a person who identified as female could, on that particular day, could have access to a ladies bathroom, and similarly for men. And this, a lot of people had an objection to, and said that it increases the risk of sexual assault, and especially in public spaces where public bathrooms are already, they come with that they are places that are categorized as high risk in terms of places where sexual abuse and assaults happen. uh, I understand both sides of the story. Similarly, in case in sport, we are seeing that there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of news on how uh, there are people who work their way into the system because one gender is easier in terms of competition versus the other, and therefore They use the gender identification to move from one category to another. uh, there's a lot of science behind all of these things, and I think one part of it is social, one part of it is science, and I think we have a long way to go in terms of understanding it completely and entirely. But I think the to come bring back to this conversation, we're talking about workplaces. It's a very controlled environment, and here in this controlled environment, I think if we bring the basic tenet of the handbook down to respect, then we're able to address a lot of these issues in a more holistic way. When we look at harassment for what it is, I'm not saying be gender agnostic, because that is failing people of their lived experience. It's like saying your who you are doesn't matter to me, only what you do is important. So acknowledging gender, acknowledging fluidity, but bringing it back to respect. And I think, again, workplaces being a controlled environment, you have the privilege of having conversations regularly with people on what you can do, how you can do, how you can empower each other, what is tolerated, what is not tolerated, and to redress issues as and when they come up. So, in terms of policies and fluidity, have a benchmark. What is not accepted for one person will not be accepted for the other.
Yeah. And I think the point that you make about respect, I think, is the bottom line, really. So am I doing things in a manner that is respectful of your beliefs and your practices and you
Yeah.
know your gender, etc., is a very, very primary thing. So here is another, when we talk about behaviors that could constitute harassment, there is a lot of curiosity around gender fluidity and sexual orientation, etc., because it's a new subject, and people are looking around, who is that person, kind of a thing. This That kind of a curiosity that one sees in organizations. So could outing a person, for example, be considered harassment? It's
I think
definitely
so.
disrespectful.
Yeah.
So would it qualify also as?
So I think so. I'm quite certain that it is a violation of a person's very private information.
Mhm.
But the way we are culturally, sometimes we just tend to look at things factually and objectively when it suits us.
Hmm.
And I'm shy of telling my age. I would be very uncomfortable if somebody Dina is so many years old. But I'm very comfortable saying somebody else's gender identity and defending it by saying, that's a fact, isn't it? What did I say? Did I say something that's untrue? And that's where it becomes a problem. And I, the other thing, Nimi, that we're talking a lot about policies. I think policies help. They help influence behaviors. They help bring accountability to the workplace. But what I think we also need to go back to is to say is to enable a sense, a culture of collegiality and respect. Because if you actually did, if you were considerate about a colleague, if you actually did genuinely meant no harm, then you wouldn't have outed that person.
Yeah,
It's
and I think that's a very, very important part of the education that needs to be done,
Yeah.
right? So I think educating everyone on sensitivities and the growing sensitivities
Yeah.
around all of this is very, very vital. And on the same lines, I was also just thinking whether, like you said, things are not very obviously said or done. People have that much sensitivity today, thanks to all the conversations that are happening. But can an individual, a gender fluid person, for example, claim that I feel stifled in the work environment that I'm in because I'm expected to behave straight, because I sense a certain underlying sense of homophobia? While nobody says anything, I feel I could be judged, I could be excluded, I might lose opportunities, etc., because of who I am, and therefore this is a hostile environment for me. Almost simulating it with how, women have said in the past that though nothing much has happened, the way people look at me, or the comments that are made within earshot of me, it's not said to me, but it's like conversation that's happening around me makes me feel uncomfortable. So could this also qualify as a hostile environment for
I
people
fully
in the
think so.
community?
It's as on date not protected under law. But
Hmm.
today we have the POSH Act, which entitles me to a harassment free workplace. But how many women do you actually see making a complaint of, I'm not getting a good vibe from this place because people are just being very weird and very non inclusive? It rarely happens because we end up picking our battles. And here I'm talking about very much fitting into the binary. Here I don't really have to explain about fluidity, I don't have to explain my queerness to anyone, and I still feel the discomfort and I rarely make a complaint about it.
Hmm.
Therefore, I for in terms of the people who don't identify to the binaries, can they, is it harassment? Yes, it is harassment. Can they take it up under the law? It's going to be very difficult to prove. What are you going to say? It's so intangible. It's something that could be like, and very often we see that people are
Losing you, Veena. Can't hear you.
yeah.
Veena, we lost you. Veena?
Hi, am I audible?
Now you are. We lost you for a bit. Lost you again. Veena? Veena, do you want to join back again? Okay, while we wait for Veena to come back. Veena? Saw some movement. Okay. Are there any questions meanwhile? Anything that I can take while Veena joins us back? So, on the point, is it possible to onboard a queer person on the IC? You absolutely can. We are not looking at, in fact, I think it's a good idea to do it for the simple reason it brings a different perspective. And, so far we've never really asked about the gender identity of a person, but if there is a queer person who can be trained and put on the IC, I think it's a really cool idea to do that, even without it being a gender fluid complainant. Does that answer your question? If we have few members from gender fluid section and they are over the 3-year term and we do not have anyone to replace them, what do we do? Can we continue with them till we have a replacement? Yeah. Good question. Yeah, Veena, you're back. Yeah. So here was, I was just taking some questions. There's a question from Tabus. Do you want to take that?
Yeah. So the question is, we have a few members from gender fluid section. They're over 3-year term, and we do not have anyone to replace them. What do we do? Can we continue them till we ever? Yes, you can. Just document reasons why they are continuing their term. Because sorry, am I looking? Is my window correctly placed? Am I looking for? Okay, sir.
You are.
Yeah.
Fine.
So, yeah, so just document your reasons, but this can't continue forever, right? So you can't have the same people running for 30 years, because that also means there's a diversity parameter that you're not meeting. So we used to have this question a lot in 2013, saying, I don't have enough women, can we just like document that we don't have it, and therefore have a woman from our parent company, sister company, client company, da, da, da. It was okay as an interim measure. 10 years down the line, asking the same question would be odd from a woman context. But now you guys are already ahead of the curve and you're having gender fluid people. So I think it's fine as long as you document reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Veena, we lost you while you were in the middle of a question, but I'm sure it
Mhm.
will come back. I
Yeah.
was just thinking we were talking specifically about sexual harassment. Now, that's one form of harassment. But there are
Yeah.
also situations where people that do not conform to the binary gender expectations are often rejected for promotions or certain roles and career growth opportunities, etc. Would that could that also qualify in some ways? I mean, it definitely qualifies as discrimination, but if it's there is a pattern around it in the organization, could it qualify under sexual harassment as, or based on my gender identity, I am being rejected for opportunities that could otherwise have come to me?
So I don't think it would necessarily be sexual harassment if the conduct is not sexual in nature.
Hmm.
That being said, it is certainly discrimination. Can the entire spectrum have a recourse under law? Not necessarily. We have the Equal Remuneration Act, which protects women. It says that men and women should have equal should be pay. There should be pay parity, and there should be no discrimination in terms of transfer, hiring, and those and promotions. So for women, those protections are built in. Under your policy, extend it to everyone.
Hmm.
Hello?
Yeah, go on, Veena. You froze for a bit.
Sorry, was I audible, Nimi?
We lost you in between. You froze for a bit, Veena.
Sorry. So what I was saying is, under the Equal Remuneration Act, we have parity in terms of payment, transfer, recruitment, and promotion. And there is no reason why you can't extend the same benefits under your policy to everyone who identifies as a person who's not a woman.
Hmm. True. Yeah, and I think it's also, self-determining your gender, I think, is a right that a lot of
Yeah,
people are fighting for, right? I mean, otherwise the gender is assigned
yeah,
to you, and
absolutely.
right. And however, there are times, like for example, while we have recognized the transgender community,
Yeah,
for example.
so the Supreme Court has already said.
Yeah, I think that was a question that came up. We'll come back to it. Yeah, you were saying the Supreme Court? Veena? Veena, can you hear us? Veena? Veena, can you hear?
Sorry, Nimi, I didn't.
Okay. So she comes back. The question that I was asking is that it's, almost like a fundamental right that I decide my gender, right? It was earlier assigned to us and we didn't have the power of self-determination. We have now got to a point where we are saying you can identify for yourself what your gender is. And, and this becomes very important, because that's a very core part of your identity. But at the same time, for it to be accepted by the organization, you need to sometimes provide proof. So you have to go through medical examinations and provide documents of of the gender that you're identifying with, etc., which then is a little offensive in a sense. While at one level you're saying I can identify what my gender is, you're also making me do some of these things, which then is discriminatory. I think Veena had an answer for that in terms of the Supreme Court. Yeah, Veena,
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. It's just a bad network day. Yeah. So your question, Nimi, was in terms of the right to self determination, right?
Determination, yes.
Self identification. Yeah, the Supreme Court really allows us that right. Back in 2014, we were given that right, saying I decide what my gender is. But unfortunately, because of various legalities and social expectations that came into play, we have legislations today where I can apply for a transgender card, but to be able to get the benefits of those legislations, but to be able to get that card, there are very intrusive tests and checks that I need to submit myself to, including a physical determination, including a mental health determination. And I don't think as a country we are equipped to have everyone who's running those tests to be conditioned and to be softened to understand and empathize with a person who's applying for that test. And we see that we've seen this a lot. I mean, we've always been criticized for using the woman card, the religion card, the caste card. So when I'm giving somebody else a benefit and I'm empowered to give somebody the benefit by running a test on them, I'm always going to be very uh, I'm going to be very judgmental about that. And it is not possible at this stage to expect, and I don't think we are ready to say that every authority who's signing off on those transgender cards have been trained and conditioned on the nuances and intricacies of testing and what is intrusive, what is respectful, what is dignified. I don't think so. And even if it is, I want to be able to call uh, my gender or my identity what it is based on what I think it is, and not about some test that somebody else is drawing up for me.
Yeah. And for gender fluidity, it becomes almost impossible to assess,
Yeah.
right? So you need to go with that, whatever is being conveyed to you, or is how the person feels, right? So considering that there are all these multiple challenges, in terms of ensuring a safe and, more importantly, a psychologically safe space. I think physical safety, I think, to a great extent has been taken care of, and people realize that that can be easily, quantified. It's a very tangible thing. So, how do we hold space for an individual's personhood? What could companies do? I know the law is going to take a little time coming in to do that, but as organizations, as organizations that want to provide safe, respectful, psychologically safe environments, what do you think could be some of the things that organizations can do? Now, from a DEI perspective, we do constantly talk about continuing education. A lot of things are evolving. Our understanding of women, men, gender fluidity, sexual orientation, and so many different things. So all of this is constantly evolving, and we need to get organizations to travel that path with us, right? That's for sure. Are there other things that you see as important from a legal perspective? Because many times the law is brought in as a mandate, and then compliance becomes
Yeah.
the reason why people do things.
Yeah. So again, I go back to saying that the law prescribes the bare minimum everywhere. When we're looking at organizations, we're talking about, and people, we're talking about attracting talent, we're talking about retaining them, we're talking about looking good as employers, being a good place to work, best place to work, a lot of those things. The law prescribes minimum wages, which is a small amount, which is far from what several organizations provide. So when we can go way beyond the law for something like that, to in terms of the pure business of retaining people and the monetary and the capitalistic part of it, then it's not very difficult to go beyond the bare minimum that the statute expects in terms of bringing gender neutrality into your policies, in terms of bringing gender inclusivity into your policy. And I think neutrality is one way of saying I'm kind of agnostic to who you are. But when you say inclusive, I think you're extending that hand to saying, I see you. I see you, and I believe in your story, and I'd like you to be part of this organization because you're bringing value to this space. So that is one part of it, that I think we can always be playing cat and mouse, saying the law needs to catch up, policies need to be more. But when on so many aspects of life we don't wait for the law to catch up, and we're very comfortable with the laws being the bare minimum, I think this is one place that organizations can, should, and to a large extent several companies are going way beyond what the law needs. The second thing, what else can companies do? I think companies are essentially its people, and therefore one thing very important for all of us, and it starts with a lot of us, is to be very accountable bystanders. That when you are seeing disrespect in your workplace, call it out. When you're seeing discrimination in the workplace, if you are not powerful enough to call it out or create an impact, just stand there. You being around and being witness to a conduct which is discriminatory or harassing in nature will in some way curtail its impact or curtail its extent. Be a collaborative witness, be somebody who's honest and brings integrity to the space you're sitting. Again, a lot of us are limited in terms of the power and influence that we have in an organization, but we also think it's smaller than what it is, and which is why bystander accountability is something that is extremely valuable. And I think a lot of where we've reached today, and why some cities are known to be safer than other cities, is because of bystander accountability, where you will not, where because of how the society reacts, people will not be let scot free if they are abusive of, or if they harass, or if they catcall or molest a person. In some cities, it's unsafe for a bystander. So what do? I just run back to my own house and I don't care what happens to my fellow citizen. And I think the more we build on bystander accountability, the safer our environments, large and small, will be.
I think that's very beautifully stated, Veena, and that's a stance that we often tend to take as well, saying it really doesn't have to be that you need to know every nuance of gender identity and expression to be respectful of someone. You know, if you are a person, you deserve respect, and therefore, respectful behavior is an absolute basic expectation of everyone, you know, whether you understand or not, right? And I think with that, we have a little time to take questions. Any questions that we might have missed out on, something that isn't clear yet? Okay.
It's would you like me to take that, Nami?
Yeah, go ahead, Veena.
Yeah. You don't need to broad base posh as long as it's covered somewhere. That's the entire objective. You don't need to make a one size fits all policy, as long as anybody in your organization who comes across a circumstance that they believe is harassing or discriminatory, then they should have an avenue to redress their grievance, which is built into a policy.
Yeah, I will just add a little bit into this as well, Veena. We are seeing organizations that used to work on discrimination and harassment have now started to talk about disrespect and bullying, etc., which are the less tangible aspects of disrespect in the workplace. And the idea being that if you're taking care of that, then the bigger issues of discrimination and harassment does not happen. So I think having a code of conduct that sort of talks about, you know, more respectful behaviors in the workplace takes care of the larger issues, and increasingly organizations should focus more on that.
A lot of companies have code of conduct which protects the rights of gender diversity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like I think both Nimi and I said, that it's one thing to have a very broad policy where we say everyone is protected, but sometimes if I have a very different identity, and I, in my head and otherwise, feel like I don't belong because of how the organization has treated me. Sometimes an organization has to go that extra mile in telling me or telling people who belong to either to groups that don't identify as them as the gender binary, or who are identified as minority communities, to say that this policy also applies to you. I think that's where conversations and trainings will come into play. Is it necessary to include in code of conduct about powers that ICC has been given by the company management company? Not necessarily. I think you can have your flexibility on that.
Changes in posh policy have on gender outside of the workplace. Yeah. Veena, you want to take this? You talked about the workplace being a controlled environment, but what could happen in a public place, in a bus, in a in a mall or a theater, for example, could be
Yeah.
very much outside of our. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so the posh policy still applies only in the workplace context. There is a context to of an extended workplace, which is any place that the employee may have been arising out of or during the course of employment. Now, if the incident has happened which is outside of the workplace and not in connection with the workplace, then I think as organizations we can always support the employee to file a police complaint, to make a police complaint, again here assuming that the person from your organization is the one who's aggrieved and is not the person who is alleged to have committed the offense.
Yeah. And it is, again, it is a question whether the police are sensitized to understand these things. So, the larger problem continues to exist. Have
Yeah.
they been educated and trained to deal with these issues is another part of the question. But yes, you could, I mean, you
Yeah, and that also, I think it's very important for the organization to be very aware of the environment and the social context that is applicable. The empathy and the reactions of the social authorities, the law enforcement authorities could be different based on where you are, which state you are, which city you are, which locality you are. All of these things make a difference, and those things should be taken into consideration before directly saying, come, let's go to the police. So again, work from a place of respect, from a place of awareness, and a place of empathy.
yeah. How can organizations address challenges of resistance from individuals who may not understand or accept gender fluidity? Now, the biggest problems come from there, right? And which is where organizations as controlled environments have the authority to say that, it does not mean that you need to necessarily support this and advocate this or live it in your real life. But when you are working in this organization, you will be respectful of people, of all people. Yeah, so that's something that they can mandate
Yeah.
within the organization.
And I think it's very easy to draw a parallel with respect to women. I think 50 years before, we would see men being very comfortable about not having women in the workplace, saying women are a productivity drain, they just want to go home, they just want to have children, they just are. There were several opinions against women in the workplace, and then organizations start taking a stance saying, we're going to have them whether you like it or not. And then today, once we see ourselves on boards and in positions of leadership, the narrative is changing. And I think it's a matter of time before people start accepting gender fluidity.
Can all genders be included in a single posh policy of an organization, or should two separate policies be made? One for women and Okay, I have a view on this. Veena, legally.
So I think both work. It depends on what your appetite here is for. You can have one policy as long as you're able to ensure that you're able to stick to those timelines. You're able to have the same ICC look into all complaints that come. Several of our clients have two policies. One is specifically with respect to women, sticking to the four walls of the POSH Act, and have a more general harassment and a grievance redressal policy that anyone is able to go under. And the second policy also sometimes comes handy when, say, the 3 month time period under the POSH Act has been breached. So then you go under your HR policy. So uh, both work fine, as long, so I go back to the basis saying, as long as you have some portal, some portal that works efficiently for addressing grievances of individuals, of be they women, men, anyone, that's fine. Whether you do run a one policy, five policies, it's fine. It's, as long as it's there, it's great.
Agree. Okay to include our POSH policy. It certainly should be part of your handbook. I think it should be part of your onboarding. Everybody should be made aware of the policy. I think it's absolutely essential to do that.
So I have an addition to make there, because sometimes from an enforcement perspective, you will have your authorities coming and saying, "I want to see your POSH policy." You may not want to share your handbook for whatever reason. Now there are no real issues, but back when 377 was not read down, and there were and companies were comfortable extending their equal opportunity policy to the LGBT community, they did not really want to circulate their handbooks which really said so. So if you want to limit circulation of your handbook, have it as part of your handbook, but clearly call it out as your POSH policy, so you can submit that to an external authority, a law enforcement agency, or whoever else, as and when required.
Have you been able to define some of the nuances and sensitivities that the IC will need to consider if a complaint is received by a non-binary transgender? Yeah, I think there is some work to be done on this bit. We do quite a bit of work on the common biases that exist and which come into play. For example, we have sometimes heard committee members saying, "Oh, he's a married man and therefore the punishment should be higher," kind of a thing, which is a clear bias. Just because you're married, it does not mean that you need a higher punishment or a lower punishment. Similarly, there would be reactions like, "Oh, she's a very timid woman, and if she's raised a complaint, it must be real." Yeah. So, these are all kinds of things that come in. So there is a very high chance, especially with the fact that most of us are not very fully aware of what the lived experiences of the non-binary transgender community is, for us to not fully understand where they're coming from. So I think a lot more reading, a lot more understanding, a lot more conversations around this is important for people to develop the right sensitivity. Una, want to add to that?
I fully agree. And I think what we all end up doing, and a lot, is the equivalent of mansplaining when it comes to gender fluidity. We read, we understand, but a lot of us don't really. And again, I'm speaking from the perspective of a cishet woman here, that I read, I understand, I believe that I know it all. But I have zero experience, I have zero lived experiences of of a person who identifies as gender fluid or queer, and therefore my primary responsibility is to hear them out from a place of respect. And that is that's something that I see members need to be trained, and there cannot be one nuance or one sensitization. I think in that space also we should be more accepting. So tomorrow, and this we see in other countries where people identify as several things, and we make a mockery out of it very often, where somebody identifies as a cat or a werewolf or some of those things. And it's okay. That also, I think, is something that one should respect. How does that? It's just like what you choose to wear on a particular day, not by trivializing. I don't mean to trivialize. and a choice of identity. But I think everybody deserves the respect, and everybody deserves to be heard out. And you can't really build a fact book or a playbook for inquiring and redressing complaints, because the kind of complaints are going to change, the kind of people are going to be different. There's no one questionnaire that's going to fit it.
Agree. I know we are over time on this. Veena, it's such a pleasure always to powwow with you on some of these topics. I know, we've touched on something that, there have rarely been any conversations on. So I think we've made a beginning with this conversation today, and hopefully we'll build on it and, talk about some of these very uncomfortable things for which we really don't have very strong guidelines. The law is just so vague on so many aspects that we have to sometimes take the law into our hands, so to say, and offer what it intends to offer to the best of our abilities, right? So, thank you so much for always being available to sort of throw these ideas around and to have your views, which I think are both very practical and I think, where you bring in the law and what one needs to be mindful of as well. So every conversation has been so valuable for us, and we do hope to have your continued support as we go forward.
Likewise, Nimi, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. And these conversations also help me think and be a better employment lawyer, I guess. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone. Thanks, Mitch, Smita, Sandra, all of you who've helped us in the background, collate questions, and stay in touch and be part of our conversations as we bring in more such conversations for us to engage with. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Nimi. Thank you, Veena. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And we shall see you next month on the same platforms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.